computer, recording this computer. Okay, so if that's okay, everybody, we are being recorded, and I think it records chats and everything that are public. So, don't say any bad words at this stage. I'm going to keep muting everybody. Yeah, except me, so that you can hear my wee bits. And Morris doesn't mind if I go over. Is that right, Morris? No, I try.
Don't even dare.
Yeah, we'll have everybody in at that stage anyway by the time Morris starts. Okay. So let me just share my presentation with you. I will keep this brief. Here we are. And then I need to, I'm working with one screen today rather than the usual two screens. I have a cable issue. I need to get to a shop. Here we go. All right. So thanks so much to everybody. And I'll be distracted with people coming in now. So you're going to have to bear with me there. And as I keep admitting people. All right. So this is the Future Minds Research Network. And this is our first event. So you're all very, very welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. This was a grant that we received from the UKRI, MRC, ESRC, all of those groups came together to put out calls for research collaborations, and we applied for some money, and this was the outcome of it. So I will take you through briefly what we're trying to do here as I multitask and let people into the room as well. And keep muting people. Okay, so there we are. Okay, so why do we feel that Northern Ireland needed children and young persons mental health research network? Well, this was something that we had to argue for in our funding application. It's well recognised that Northern Ireland has high rates of poverty, mental illness, and of course our significant history of conflict. And this was what got me into mental health research. I was working with Professor Brendan Bunting, who really was the person who gave me my big break. So I'm so grateful for that. So I was a researcher on this study in 2008. It's called the Northern Ireland Study of Health and Stress, where we looked at the population levels of mental health and mental illness and exposure to the troubles. And what we discovered in that study was that our rates of mental health problems here are really quite high compared to other countries. And in that study, we asked all sorts of questions about trauma exposure, and we found that 39% of people here had reported in 2005 to 2008 now that they had witnessed or experienced trauma related to the Northern Ireland Troubles. And that was the reason, those troubles related traumas were the reason that we had the highest rates of post-traumatic stress disorder in all of the studies of this group of studies. So this was the World Mental Health Survey Initiative that we're talking about here. So that's what really got me interested in this area. We also looked at childhood adversities in that study. And of course, we realized then that the biggest adversity, adversity that our children was facing in Northern Ireland, as with many other places, is poverty. So we have high rates of poverty, mental illness, and a history of conflict that kind of marks us out as being a bit different. There's been more recent studies on these topics, and on the 19th of October, we had the launch of the first children and young people's mental health survey of all of Northern Ireland. Again, a similar survey that looked at the rates of mental illness in young people and looked at parents and young people together, because at this stage we're recognizing that the relationships, the things that happen in those early years are actually really, really crucial. And again, this study revealed that our current generation of young people also have higher rates of mental illness and mental health problems than children in other parts of the UK and other places. So we've invited along Lisa to talk about that study, and she's going to be part of the next webinar on the 2nd of December. It's a really, really important piece of research. So basically, a new generation of young people are experiencing high rates of mental illness, and as a society, we're concerned about the transgenerational transmission of trauma in the form of adversities and also in other ways. And we have Elaine Murray and Colin Walsh here today as well, and they're going to be talking about their work looking at the biological factors that influence the transmission of trauma from one generation to the next. So we're tackling this from many different areas. But there is that concern about transgenerational transmission of trauma, and we know that the young people with more suicidal behaviour, higher rates of mental illness, that's the same areas that have been affected by the Troubles, and those are the children that have grown up in communities that are affected by the Troubles. So there's lots of things here in Northern Ireland that mark us out as being a bit different from other places. And also there's a lot we can learn from a population like Northern Ireland when we're emerging from a period of conflict, in terms of how we manage conflict and the mental health impact of conflict and trauma generally. So we wanted to use all of those things to try and do something really unique to help our young people here. So the goals of this research network are really to bring together young people with academic researchers and professionals and policymakers, and other key stakeholders to produce new ways of improving mental health for this population, given our history of trauma and everything else that we've gone through. And we realise as academics, we haven't been too good about that public engagement stuff up until now, and particularly engagement with young people. You know, it's difficult, and it's ethically, there's a lot of things that we need to navigate. So we haven't done enough of that. I think that it's fair to say. So this is something that we want to do much, much more of, and this is going to be a starting point, hopefully. We also want to try and set the youth mental health research agenda for Northern Ireland. And we have a lot of ideas ourselves about what kind of research needs to be done here and what can be learned from this population. But, you know, we haven't really asked young people about what their priorities are and what matters to them. And that is so, so important, because the answers you get aren't necessarily what you would think. And it's really, really helpful when we do that. We also have undertaken a review of the evidence base in mental health in young people in Northern Ireland, so that we can identify the gaps in evidence and the gaps in our knowledge. And that, of course, will put us in a better position to produce research that's actually really relevant, that will address those gaps and help improve our understanding of what's happening in this part of the world. So our goals are to bring together all of those groups and to report on the mental health in young people in Northern Ireland, the priorities for research for the future. So, and I'll explain how my role as mental health champion fits with all of this too in a minute. We're going to undertake a couple of pilot studies where we're looking at technology and trauma transmission and those areas. So that's part of this work too. And we're going to be launching 5 Bootstrap Awards next year to young people themselves for activities on the theme of adolescent mental health too. And the final part of it is this public engagement work. We were supposed to be delivering mini conferences where we could see each other in person and connect over coffee and scones and all those things that we do so well here. But we can't do that. So what we're doing instead is more webinars. It's a different way of working, but actually I really like it. I think it's the fact we can record it's really good as well. So we can reach more people this way. And so it'll be interesting to even hear from young people about how this works for them as we're looking to the future, when other options might be available. So roundtables, conferences, influencing research, practice, care, all of those things are an important part of what we want to do here. So just to give you some policy context in terms of mental health in Northern Ireland generally, as you're probably aware, our executive were out of action for a few years because of various different disputes. But in 2020, there was an agreement, this new decade, new approach agreement in January 2020, and all of the political parties signed up to this so that they could get the executive back, and this get our government functioning again so that we could do things here. And within that new decade, new start agreement, there was the commitment to a mental health action plan to try and address some of the issues that we knew were facing this population. So this action plan was launched in May. And in the action plan, there's all of these different actions, but one of the most important actions is the mental health strategy. A strategy to improve our mental health services and indeed to improve the mental health of the whole population. It's a 10-year strategy, and you can see it's in there under point 1.1. It was approved. The project board has been established, and we are currently writing that strategy. It's going to be out for consultation before December. So all of this stuff is happening. And that's great. So we're designing a strategy. So now this is happening. So this stuff is so timely, because next year the consultation will be out, and the various different implementation, the aspects around implementation of the strategy will be being worked out in various different groups. So what we're saying here now has a real power to influence how things happen in the future. There's also going to be a 10-year funding plan to support the strategy. So we write the ideal, the perfect strategy, and then we get the funding plan together. So it's not about writing a strategy that fits whatever amount of funding we have. We need to fully fund this because this is a priority. And one other action in there was the creation of a mental health champion role. And that the idea of a mental health champion has been discussed for a long time. And the idea of a person or an office that could push various different aspects of mental health and the mental health agenda. And again, that was approved in May 2020. They were to start the appointment process in June 2020. And in July 2020, I was asked by the minister if I could take up the position on an interim basis until they had the public appointments process completed. So I agreed to that, and we were in the middle of a pandemic, and I just thought it was a good opportunity to do some really good work. And of course, the public appointments process still hasn't really happened, and I would intend to apply for it whenever it does come out. But I'm told it's going to be a few months. It might even be next summer before that happens. So in the meantime, I've got this really exciting role where I can bring together academic research with a strategy for mental health in Northern Ireland, and I can use my networks and my contacts to try and create change at policy level to make impact. So I've just pasted this from the announcement of the mental health champion. There's lots of information on this in various different places, but basically I'm a public advocate for mental health. I listen to people who are affected. Young people are a really, really important group. And then I listen to groups that are doing the work here, and then bring that back to government. And it's all the government departments. For health, it's the mental health strategy. In education, it's mental health in schools. So I'm involved across the government departments to advise and support and to work with them to make sure that policies around mental health are meeting the needs of the population and are based on the evidence of what works. I can challenge decisions and policies, but mostly it's about working with government to make change. I'm also about supporting research into mental health. I don't know if you could see my little arrow there, but I'm supporting research into mental health, finding out what research needs to be done. And this is how I'm doing it. So that's great. So there's the three elements of my role. I do a lot of the network hub, but that's sending out messages on behalf of the government and other people, places, agencies, and participating in that public discussion about mental health here. And this is about having a public discussion about young people's mental health and what research is needed. So it fits very nicely with that part of my role. The key themes that are emerging so far are around early intervention and prevention. So young people are right in there. Suicide prevention, I have a bit of a track record there in some suicide research and speaking about this topic in Northern Ireland. So that's an ongoing theme. Children and young people generally, because there's so much work needs to be done there, and the services and the proportion of money allocated to young people's mental health services is much, much lower. Mental health in general is really low. If we look at children and young people, it's even lower, the proportions. It's just so out of kilter with other places. That needs to change. Alcohol and drugs is a very, very prominent and important issue that feeds into all of those other issues that we're not getting right here. And then finally, service improvement generally. So you can find out more about me through all of these different channels, or just send me an email at one of my many email addresses, and we'll get back to you. I mean, my schedule's pretty busy, but I'm trying to keep on top of all the contacts so far. But today is just so exciting. So today is an opportunity to hear from other research experts and to hear from young people themselves about what we should be doing as academics. And so without any further ado, I'm going to press on and introduce the next speaker. Or maybe Rhonda, would you like to come in? I'll unmute you, or you could unmute yourself. You're on mute.
Okay, I'm ready to go if you wish.
Ready to go. Okay, Morris, thank you so much. I only took up 3 minutes of your time there, so hopefully you'll be all right. Thank you.
Yeah, I noticed. Okay, I hope you can see my presentation okay. If you can't, then tell me now. I'm going to be playing a few videos, and I'll just let the audio come through my microphone, and it should be good enough. And let's not worry too much about it. This is a summary of looking at what the literature says about chatbots and mental health apps for young people. And there was one of the papers was indeed titled, "Can Your Smartphone Be Your Therapist?" So I'm not sure if we answer that question, but that's what we're going to look at. And the intention here is to give you all a view of what mental health apps and chatbots are, and then we can continue the conversation through the Future Minds in the engagement venues for us. So, so what are young people's mental health needs? And this isn't my view. This is from one of these papers that are listed at the end of the presentation. So we know they're largely unmet. So there is an issue. This is due, and we've heard Siobhan and others talk about the lack of investment in child and adolescent mental health in GB, but in particular in Northern Ireland. A lack of evidence-based treatment, poorly targeted or badly implemented interventions, or all of the above, really. So the needs are not being met. However, children and young people are the largest consumer of the digital world, put it that way. And as such, they constitute one of the key target groups for digital interventions, presupposing a digital intervention is useful. But we know there is an appetite for digital engagement with young people. We know also that mental health issues such as stress, anxiety, depression are amongst the health information most searched for by teenagers online. And online content often motivates young people to change their health behaviors. If any of you have teenagers, you'll hear them talking about their hacks, life hacks, and so on, which is really health behavior change often in the vernacular of a teenager. So young people's first-hand experience of mental health chatbots should play a role in shaping any debate around so-called e-mental health or digital interventions or whatever we want to call it. These things are very important, and we need to understand, that we need to be able to co-produce solutions with young people. Here's the first video, which is from BBC Click a few weeks ago.
There are many other free, clinically approved tools in the NHS Apps Library. New this year, this one aims to help 10 to 18-year-olds improve mental health with its floating AI-driven chatbot.
Let's get started. And remember, I'm here with you every step of the way.
This one uses cognitive behavioural therapy to help those struggling with negative thoughts. Whilst these choose your own adventure games help instill useful emotional fitness skills. Apps like these have become increasingly popular in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. But although they may help, it's important to remember that they don't replace a medical professional.
Okay, so short and sweet. We don't want to hear it again. And the main paper that I based this talk on was on young people's ethical perspectives on chatbots for mental health support. So pretty relevant. And the key takeaways from that paper were that chatbots are normally developed using CBT, cognitive behavioral techniques, drawing therapeutic methods and adopting them from other approaches within CBT, such as dialectical behavior therapy, mindfulness-based methods, and so on, and health and fitness apps, in which well-being and mindfulness and so on apps are categorized in both app stores, and Android and Apple are, there's an enormous growth on them. So there's a problem of choice for young people. Which ones are giving me correct advice? People using chatbots actually quite like the experience, but understand that it's not really a normal, natural conversation as we would have it. More positively, they like check-ins, the ability to check in and maybe give a mood log or rate something. And then the attempt at the chatbot to be empathic and to be caring and to have a personality. And this is a conundrum in research today. Should it have a personality? Should it say, look, I'm a robot. I can pretend to have a personality. I'm not really human. But people seem to engage more whenever there is a pretense of a personality, because that's all it is. Then users who engaged with chatbots showed a higher reduction in depression symptoms in comparison to less engaged app users. So key takeaway there, if you are working it, then you will get a result. Overall, users found it helpful. They also were shown to produce increases in well-being and reductions in perceived stress. This isn't a real-world sample in comparison to a separate control group. And these effects, again, only apply to those people who actively adhere to the intervention. So we know how poor we are at, prospective memory for remembering to do things in the future, remembering to check in an app and so on. And unless there's some kind of a reward in terms of some feedback loop, then we drop off very quickly. Another paper, which was essentially is quite famous because it was a very short 2-week RCT and showed that it had a significant impact. And this was a Wobot chatbot. So 24/7, no couches, no meds, no childhood stuff, just strategies to improve your mood and the occasional dorky joke. So it's trying to have a personality. And this is the next video we're just going to run through very quickly.
Need to get something off your chest? Meet Wobot, the friendly little bot who's ready to listen 24/7. Wobot's been trained in cognitive behavior therapy, an approach to mental health that is all about identifying distortions in your thinking. Wobot doesn't do therapy, but he can be your guide to help you figure out things on your own. Oh, and he's effective. Some nice people at Stanford University demonstrated chatting to Wobot for 2 weeks led to significant improvement in mood. Every day he asks how your day is going, how you're feeling, and what you're up to. He builds an emotional model of you over time and can help you see patterns in your mood. As he learns about you, he'll teach you things, like useful strategies and practical tools that have been shown to work. You're not troubling him at all. Honestly, he has nothing else to do. So let Wobot annoy his way into your heart and start feeling better today.
Okay, so you get the idea. This is one of the most successful ones. If we look at another paper, which is from Scandinavia, it's very recent, and again is thinking about young people specifically and engaging with them. Positively, young people see chatbots as an anonymous way of getting information. So, the chatbot doesn't care who they are, if they're coming on at 3 in the morning and just want some information. So it's better than Google, it's better than telephone services. It's artificial, so I'm not so sure about this, but it's perceived to be good at keeping secrets and will not share the information with others. This is a case where if an NHS app store has an app and says it does that, then it really, really has to. But out in the wild, others could say that and could be obviously storing information illegally in theory. Chatbots belong in the machine world of computing, and as such, it might be easier to trust that questions or self-disclosures won't leak into the real world. That it's in confidence, which is a strange concept, that you're trusting a machine, and we know, as we'll see in one of my last slides, we see that people actually just like to have a chat with a chatbot, and in doing so will maybe divulge what would be relatively confidential information. But by securing young people's anonymity, chatbots can lower the threshold for youths to reach out and get the information they need. So you can see quite a compelling argument that if the public health can get apps out there that are trusted, then young people should use them for all the reasons that have been given here. However, we have to make sure that confidentiality and privacy is there to foster trust between young people and chatbots. And again, from that same article from Scandinavia, chatbots can't be offended or exhausted. So they don't get tired of conversation. This can be fostering an environment where young people feel they can talk more freely, they're not being judged. The chatbot isn't getting tired of listening to them. However, it's an artificial conversation and the human may get bored with dorky jokes, you know, as a way of breaking up the conversation. The use of AI and virtual humans as well has been shown to facilitate more information sharing and less self-impression management and fear of self-disclosure. Now, there's some research that's beyond the scope of this talk that uses virtual avatars for those with ASD, which has been shown to be really positive and works, but I say that's beyond the scope of this. In addition to offering confidential and engaging conversations, being able to provide really quality assured information and practical advice has been noted as a benefit to young people. So if the health services, whoever the provider is, can get it to be quality assured and people believe it's quality assured, then you're onto a winner, I think, if you're developing these kind of apps. So a chatbot that's trained in verified health data can make trusted advice more available to young people. And who knows, young people may come back to it and may share that information with others or may point and refer others to it. However, we do have to be aware of the issues. Issues such as suicide risks, self-harm, and cases where physical or psychological abuse is being reported. How does a chatbot, you know, understand what's going on and the seriousness of it and the elevation of that disclosure, perhaps to the police or to some other trusted third party against the conversation being confidential? So we know that Lifeline NI will call emergency services if they're talking to someone and feel the need for emergency services to go to that person's home. We know that Samaritans generally won't, and we don't know how we can handle this as a chatbot. So this is an area that is quite difficult, especially if the chatbot is trying to understand natural language communication, i.e. free text, either spoken or written into a text box. So that's the main gist of the presentation. And a couple of things that I'd like to go through. There's one more little video to look at. This is so we have research tools in the university where we can look at every review written about Woebot over the last few years around the world in English. And then this is just a word cloud of it. If the color is green, it means it's positive, a positive conversation about anxiety or about learning or about thoughts or whatever. So you can get a quick idea for what people think about Woebot. And this is actually the word cloud from the UK users of Woebot over the last few years. So it's not what young people in Northern Ireland would make use of them and what they would say about it, but it's what people in the UK, including some people obviously from Northern Ireland, using this. And we know they're not exclusively young people, although the demographic here is relatively skewed towards younger people who are digital natives and so on. So young people do seem to engage with these kind of apps, do seem to like them. One of the biggest problems with digital interventions is continued engagement, and that people don't stop using it. Because they don't feel the need to, or they forget, or they have a busy life or whatever. So this one here had, this was 4,000 UK reviews this word cloud is generated from, and you can see that 89% of reviews are positive, and this is quite good. So that's really what people think of one of the preeminent chatbots that's out there. But remember, in Facebook Messenger alone, I know young people don't use Facebook, but in Facebook Messenger alone, there are 200,000 chatbots. And out in the app world, there are hundreds of thousands of different ones. So there is a lot of chatbot population, never mind people. So you got to find the right one, and then you got to feel some utility from it. here's the last video. This is one that I'll run it until, you know, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it through my crappy broadband, but sure, let's see how it goes. So this is Replica. This is a very different chatbot from Wobot. This isn't designed to make you feel better. This is a company who are just designing a conversational user interface for, you know, random chat, as teenagers would call it. So if you just want to have a chat with like a virtual friend, then you can do so here. You can see to the left of the start typing box, there's like a little life ring. And if you click on that, it brings up an interaction about if you feel in danger or vulnerable or whatever. So it's good to see that. It's gamifying the conversation, so it's always trying to get you up to the next level. You can see up at the top, I'm in level 2 already. I have 140 XPs or whatever, and I'm chatty. So you can see how a very young, maybe an 8 to 12-year-old could find this a very nice tool to get on, especially if they've been kicked out of Snapchat or some of the other tools for antisocial behavior. Or if they just want to have a chat with, you know, anybody who, you know, purports to understand them. As I'm speaking, you know, what's this trying to do right now? Well, it's trying to get me to give a word first line to a song, and then it gives the next line, and then I give the other one, and so on. And it's not that engaging, but it's got a whole battery of hundreds of these kind of strategies for conversation, it brings them out. So I think if you were using this, there's probably enough content there for many years use. So we saw the number of users in the UK that we use with Replica, or sorry, we use with Wobot, which is quite a large number. But then there's tools like this, chatbots like this, that are under the radar academically. However, whenever we look at the word cloud from Replica, we can see that there's the red ones are negative words in the word cloud, and the orange, I think, are neither positive or negative. So there's a lot more red in this word cloud. There's things like creepy and weird, sexual, fake, freaked, creeped, and so on. So none of these appear on Wobot, which is primarily designed to support people's mental health and give them a more positive outcome if they are depressed. Replica isn't like that. It's just trying to engage people and then to monetize that engagement down the line. And look at the numbers here. This is incredible, 171,000 reviews. So globally, Replica is the game in town for chatbots, whereas all the academic researchers are talking about things like Wobot. So we need to be very aware of the practicalities, that if we talk about mental health apps and everybody, all the young people are using these kind of conversational support tools, or whatever you want to call them, that's where most of the action seems to be, even though there's a more negative result there in people's reviews. Okay, that's me more or less done. The BBC video is on here, and the 3 papers are here, and the tool that we use for app reviews is listed here as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Morris. That was really interesting. Thank you. Is this our golden slide, is it? And that's Morris's screen. Okay. So what we've got now is about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back in, and we are getting the Elephant in the Room group next, which is brilliant. So yeah, if somebody asked there in the chat, will we be able to get a recording? Absolutely, we're recording this and we'll be able to send it to you. So that's why I'm saying just be careful for the people who just come in. The chat's going to be there as well, so we can't take that away. All right, so thanks so much. And if you could join us again at about 1:45, and we'll get moving then on the second of the presentations for today. Thank you. Okay, everybody, we've got a few more faces. Are people back yet? Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, let's go again. We have John Joe McGrady from the Elephant in the Room group next. John Joe's going to be telling us about the work that they're doing and young people's mental health work that they've done. So will we get started? John Joe, are you there anywhere?
All right, how are you? Can you hear me okay?
Hello. Now, can you share your screen?
I can indeed. 2 wee seconds.
Thanks so much for joining us today. This is just great.
Can you see this okay?
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Right, no problem.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
Yep, dead on. So I'm John Joe McGrady. I'm from the Belfast Youth Forum and the Elephant in the Room campaign. So how did this research come about? So back in July 2016, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child recommended that the government in the North of Ireland invest heavily in children and young people's mental health services. At a follow-up event in October 2016, this was organised by Belfast Youth Forum, Northern Ireland Youth Forum, and the Children's Law Centre. Over 100 young people expressed their frustrations at the lack of mental health education and support services in the North. They called on the UN's recommendation to be fully implemented by the government. So what did we want to find out? Where young people got their mental health information and how do they rate this? What actions they think our government should take in promoting positive mental health? Where young people would like to go to receive mental health info and support, and how young people view mental health, and how does this impact on their ability to speak about it. So just some of the facts. Mental illness is the largest cause of ill health in the North. The North has the highest suicide rates in the UK, and more than 20% of the young people here are suffering significant mental health problems by the age of 18. So how do we do this research? We want this research to be a piece of work done by young people for young people. So we got in contact with a local researcher, Dr. Johnny Byrne from Ulster University, to help us. We developed an online survey and focus groups. The survey, I know, went around the C2K network across all schools, and the focus groups, there was one in Belfast, Newry, Derry and Ballymena. And then as a result of that, we analysed the findings and created the research report. The research journey. So the research was carried out from January to April 2018. This was sent around the all post-primary schools in the North and promoted on social media. As a result, we had 1,117 young people complete the survey. And as I said, there was 4 focus groups that took place in Belfast, Newry, Ballymena and Derry. From May to August 2018, they analysed the findings of the research and produced a report. So this is the findings of the report. So again, 1,117 young people took part of the mental health survey, and 91% of them told us that mental health is a huge issue for young people in the North. The focus groups showed that there's an appetite among young people to talk about mental health, access information, and the challenge of the negative stigma. The findings can be broken into 3 broad themes: stigma, safe spaces, and schools and information. So we're going to address stigma first. So young people told us that there's a negative stigma attached to mental health, which indeed turns to a culture of silence. 40% of young people in our survey had negative thoughts when they heard the term mental health. And this is a direct quote coming from one of the young people, saying that people are afraid of being judged and being treated differently. Young people in the focus group described the term mental health using the same sets of words and phrases. So these are just some of the examples of what young people said when they were asked about mental health. You have depression, suicide, alone, bullying, and self-harm. Safe spaces. So 76% of the survey respondents says that young people are afraid to talk about mental health. And as a result, the following circle emerges. So people are afraid to talk about mental health. They don't know how to talk about mental health, and there's a lack of safe spaces available to talk about mental health. And this just keeps going around the circle. And the next thing is the internet, a safe space. So young people in the focus group thought that online was a good place to access mental health information, but there were issues with being able to separate fact from fiction. All the young people who took part in the focus group felt that social media was responsible for the increase in negative stigma. These are some direct quotes. Some things can be exaggerated online, and then internet, YouTube filled with negativity. According to the research, according to young people, sorry, the three most common places they resource the information about mental health are 59% online, 48% from a family member, and 45% from friends. Young people say that this is a problem, that the quality of information isn't consistent and is often isn't useful because it's often framed in a negative way. It often spreads myths and rumors. It sometimes romanticizes mental health, and it encourages self-diagnosis and misinformation. Just to particularly look at schools, young people have told us that there are some positive examples of mental health education and support in schools, but this isn't the standard. Young people have said that it's difficult to access mental health information in schools, and most young people we spoke to hadn't received any information in school. The schools should adapt more to the needs of young people when it comes to mental health education services. And then it's just a direct quote coming from the survey, or the focus group, sorry. Some teachers are really good in my school. They're sound, so you feel like you go to them for help or even just a chat. But others you wouldn't go near. They would just tell you the ways up. As a result of the findings and all the research, we settled down for our three main recommendations for the government. To address the stigma, we're looking at a youth-led mental health campaign, and also a mental health dictionary. The whole thing around the mental health dictionary is, as talked about in the research report, a lot of young people don't know how to talk about mental health, and then when they go on the likes of the NHS website or other websites, they're met with big words and big complicated stuff. So it needs to be simplified. For safe spaces, a safe digital solution designed for young people by young people. Just in terms of this one, we presented in the summer from requests from the health minister to the executive working group for mental health, and as a result of that meeting, we're now currently working with the Department for Communities on this one. Our next thing is schools. So our main thing is compulsory curriculum program across all schools, and mental health and wellbeing training for all teachers, support workers, and youth workers. And my main thing on this one was, back then I remember speaking to one of the civil servants in the health department, and they were saying that they were getting suicide training, prevention training in the health department, and I'm thinking, well, if you're able to do it in the health department, then surely you should be able to do it in schools. Yep, that's the end of our presentation.
Super duper, John Joe, that's fantastic. Really, some really important points raised there around what type of well, there's some of the problems with mental health services, I guess, that we would not necessarily have considered, and the access and everything like that. I think have your group been consulted regarding the mental health and skills framework specifically? No. I mean, they've consulted with different stakeholder groups and young persons groups as well. But I think it would be very, very useful if we could connect you up with the Department for Education, the group who are developing the framework for schools, and let's do that as an action as a result of this, because that has been designed right now. And importantly, it's not just about the framework for what it should look like, but it's how it's implemented. That implementation plan that's coming next is so important. The mental health dictionary, and even the ways of navigating mental health services, where to go if you've what particular problem. I think that those are really important issues that young people are telling us that they don't know what to do or where to go, and some of the provision in schools is not as accessible as it should be, and it's really patchy. Like a lot of things in Northern Ireland, there are some areas and some schools where things are really, really good and really progressive, and other areas where young people miss out, on that. So we're trying to make things better. So that's great. So I think it might be a good idea to get back on track if we could move on then to Kathy's presentation, Professor Kathy Creswell. I wanted to include a piece of work around the COVID pandemic, you know, because this is one of the big issues that's facing our young people and indeed all of us. And Kathy will be able to tell you about her piece of research, but it's been one of the most important and influential pieces of research on the impact of the pandemic for young people, and what we need to learn from that going forward. So this has lasted longer than we originally anticipated, and I've certainly been basing a lot of my guidance on research from the findings from the coast-based study, as well as other bits of studies too. But I think there's so many important lessons we can learn there. So Kathy, I know we're running a wee bit early, but are you there? Are you?
Yes, I'm here.
Super, thank you. So we'll let you share your screen right now if you've got your slides, and then we can have a discussion and ask you some questions at the end of it and everything as well too. Thank you.
Okay, so can you see that okay? You can see the slides all right? Great, thank you. Well, thanks ever so much for having me, and I've really enjoyed listening to all the talks so far, so thanks very much for that as well. Yeah, so my name's Kathy Creswell, and I'm a Professor of Clinical Developmental Psychology at the University of Oxford. And as Siobhan said, we've been running a study called CoSpace since very early on in the pandemic to try to really track changes in children and adolescents' mental health over that time, and it's very much an ongoing project being conducted by a growing and very busy team who I'm keen to acknowledge for all their fantastic hard work in quite challenging circumstances. But we just wanted to share some of the initial highlights from what we've been doing, but also to tell you a bit about some of the additional work that we're doing as a response to some of the findings that have came out early on. So I suppose the first thing to say is that, of course, prior to the pandemic, we already knew there were good reasons to be concerned about mental health problems in children and young people. And that's already obviously been highlighted. And we've heard about the particular challenges faced in Northern Ireland. But certainly from data in England, in 2017, a national study looking at children and young people meeting diagnostic criteria for mental health problems found that almost 13% of 5 to 19-year-olds had a mental health disorder. Oh, can you see that? Can you still see it? Yeah, okay, great.
You can see your, sorry, Kathy, we can just see your first slide. Do you want to put it on?
Yeah, it's saying,
yeah, so
giving me a message. Sharing is paused. Bring your shared window to the front. Okay, hang on, sorry.
You're okay. That's perfect.
Is that, can you see it now?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, okay, great. So yeah, so almost 13% of 5 to 19-year-olds were found to have a diagnosable mental health disorder, which basically means a level of mental health difficulties that are causing significant interference in their day-to-day lives. And particularly striking was that between the surveys that were conducted in 2004 to 2017, we saw an almost 50% increase in the prevalence of emotional disorders specifically. So whereas other sorts of mental health difficulties didn't dramatically change over time, we definitely saw a marked increase in depression and anxiety. And then, of course, on top of that, the pandemic has created various challenges for children and young people with a sense of heightened threat in the environment, huge demands placed upon families, and also risks of isolation and restrictions to lots of pleasurable, rewarding activities, as well as other things that keep young people busy, such as education. So in order to try to track the impact that the pandemic was having on children and young people, we set up the CoSpace study, and this is focused on children aged 4 to 16 years of age, and we collect data from parents and carers across that age range. And then where the young people are aged 11 to 16, we also invite contributions from them as well. But I'll be talking today about the parent data because that's particularly useful as we're able to use the same measures across our age range, and we have a lot more data based on that. So I'm going to be focusing on that today. But also just to highlight that my colleagues Pete Lawrence and Helen Dodd also set up a parallel study called CoSpice focused on young children. So this is focused on preschoolers, 2 to 4-year-olds. I'm not going to be focusing on that today, but just to let you know that that is also going on, and there'll be some interesting findings coming out of that shortly. But essentially, just to let you know what we've been doing. So lockdown in the UK started on the 23rd of March and our study started a week later. So it was quite a rapid turnaround to get everything set up, as you can imagine. And since then, we've been inviting families to take part in the study. And once they've signed up, we ask them to complete surveys on a monthly basis, and that's continued as lockdown 1 started to relax, and obviously we've then had continuing disruption since. And we, in our initial plans, we said that we would continue until schools had been fully open for a month, and at that point having no idea what how hard fully open would be to define and how long it might take for us to get there. So we continue, and families are still joining the study, and families are still taking part in the study. So it's given us a really great opportunity. And so more than 13,000 parents and carers have taken part at some point in the study along the way. So just to let you know a bit about the sort of data we're collecting, our main outcome is the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire, which I'm sure many of you are aware of and probably use. And one of the real advantages of this measure is it allows us to not just look at continuous symptoms, but also to estimate likely caseness. And it's been really well validated compared to many of the other scales that are available, and is available in both parent and child report form. But we also measure a number of other secondary outcomes, so parental depression, anxiety and stress, child and parent COVID specific related concerns, and current stresses that families are facing. And we capture a lot of baseline characteristics about the children and their families. We also collect a lot of data on contextual characteristics. So there are some things that have been added along the way, and some things that have been there all the way along. So we've asked a bit about engagement in schoolwork. We ask about their actual experiences in terms of exposure to the virus. We ask about pre-existing physical and mental health conditions, as well as access to and disruption to support from mental health, educational, social support services, and also questions about routine, how children and young people are spending their time, and also about relationships and conflict within the home. And so there's a lot of data there, and we're really only at the very start in terms of making full use of that. But I'm going to be talking to you particularly about the parent data, as I said, and just to let you know, so in terms of usable data with the SDQ, we've got over 8,500 participants. And the thing I just want to really highlight about from this slide is that it's really important to recognise that this isn't a representative sample. So we've been inviting parents to sign up, complete online measures, and that's obviously going to be more appealing and accessible to some families than it is to others. And so we didn't set out with this study to identify a representative sample and be able to talk about prevalence of mental health problems. We're not equipped to do that. What we try to do is capture a broad range of experiences and to be able to look at among our population how things change over time and how that might differ for particular groups within our population, and also to look at particular mechanisms that may account for some of the changes that happen. So a couple of things just to highlight is that this is a relatively affluent group, highlighted in yellow, and it's a predominantly white British group. So very early on in the pandemic, we could see that, of course, and this won't be a surprise to anyone, that the lockdown 1 was causing a lot of stress for families, and consistently throughout lockdown 1. So the participants in CoSpace are predominantly working parents, and work was the major stressor that they were facing. And then they consistently rated their children's well-being second to that, which is notable because that was consistently higher than concerns about, for example, their child's education. And obviously at that time, many families were also concerned about family and friends outside their household that they couldn't have access to. And one thing that was really striking very early on during lockdown 1 was that families were clearly really struggling to meet the competing pressures that were placed upon them. And nearly 2/3 of parents and carers felt that they weren't sufficiently meeting the needs of both their work and their child. And when we look at the specific worries about coronavirus, we could see, and this is parents reporting on their children, that there were obviously children and young people were recognised COVID was a serious issue and were particularly concerned about other people, loved ones, catching the virus, much less so about themselves doing so. And that was followed by missing school or work. But the key thing that we're able to do in this study, because of our repeated measures over time, is to try and capture changes in mental health over lockdown. So the data here shows you how things changed for primary school and secondary school age students over 1 month of lockdown 1. So these people generally started some point during the first month of our study and then completed a second follow-up within lockdown 1. So all of this data was collected within lockdown 1. And what we can see, essentially, if we look at the primary school age group, we can see that there were elevations across restlessness, inattention, behavioural problems and emotional problems. These are all significant, but it's very large sample. So you can see that generally effects were larger for the behavioural problems than they were for the emotional difficulties. For the secondary school age pupils, the elevations were less marked, but we did see increases in the behavioural difficulties and restlessness, inattention. But interestingly, among this group, we actually saw a reduction in emotional symptoms over time amongst the secondary school age students. And actually, when we look at this in terms of caseness, and we need to be a bit cautious because we are doing this on the basis of the STQ, but we find that essentially among the primary school age group, this translated to a 14% increase in those meeting possible or probable criteria for caseness for emotional difficulties, a 35% increase for those meeting possible or probable caseness for behavioural problems, and a 21% increase for restlessness and inattention. For the secondary school age pupils, for emotions, there wasn't a clear increase, but we did see increases of about 10% for the behavioural and restlessness, inattention problems. So those, even though they look quite small scores in terms of symptoms, actually in terms of the elevations, you can see actually they do translate into quite marked increases in the number of children and young people who cross the threshold into possible or probable disorder status. So, I mean, many people have been surprised by the fact that we found more marked increase in difficulties among the primary school age group than the secondary school age group. And it's really important here to obviously note that it's not a representative sample. That doesn't mean that will be the case for primary school versus secondary school students as a whole, but what might account for that, those differences in our sample? Well, we've just only really started to explore these things, but a couple of things have really stood out. One is that among our sample, actually the vast majority of secondary school age students were having regular contact with their peers throughout lockdown 1. So you can see among our population, over 80% of the secondary school students were having regular communication with their peers in some way, whether it was on through gaming, social media, phone, text, video. In some way they were having regular contact, whereas actually only about 30% of the primary school age group were regularly communicating with peers, which is not surprising, but I think is obviously a really critical consideration. And the other thing that was clear amongst our population is that life seemed to be particularly stressful for parents of younger children. And again, I think this is possibly not surprising in that for where there were younger children at home, they required much more input from the parents in terms of homeschooling and just, feeding them, entertaining them, etc. And many of these parents were really juggling that with work as well. So whereas as they get older, obviously the young people could be more independent much of the time. And certainly among our population, we found a higher number of parents of primary school children really felt they weren't at all meeting the needs of their work and their child, whereas a higher number of parents of adolescents felt that they were completely on top of that. So those are two factors that might explain where we see some variation in mental health outcomes over lockdown, both in terms of contact with peers and family stress. Now, one of the things that's also really important to highlight is that obviously what we've seen so far reflect means across the whole population, and different people, as we know, have responded very differently to their experience during the pandemic. And so we've been keen to sort of look at the experiences of particular groups. So these graphs show us what happened for children who are living on particularly low incomes. So basically this is children where families are living on less than £16,000 a year, and they're in the darker green. And essentially what you can see is across whether it's behavioural problems, emotional difficulties, restlessness, inattention, we see significantly elevated levels of problems amongst those children and young people who are living in low-income households. We didn't actually find that difference expanded over the course of the lockdown, but actually what the lockdown does is really shine a light on what was already there and what continued to be there, in that the huge strain that's put on families and the risk of mental health problems for those living in the context of low incomes. And when you translate that into cases, it's quite striking. So we find that the risk of meeting the caseness criteria for emotional problems is more than double. It's also more than double for restlessness, inattention, and behavioural problems. Now, the data that we've looked at so far has been from lockdown 1, and since then, obviously, which kind of covers the period within this the red circle in each graph. Since then, we've been able to look at our data over a longer period. And essentially what we see is that, particularly for the primary school age group, across all the difficulties we've assessed, we generally saw difficulties increase and peak in around June, and then start to reduce again after June, which is when lockdown 1 kind of ended. Homeschooling demands reduced in July, and children and young people were able to have a bit more contact with others. So as you can see in the yellow bar, for all of them, there's that pattern of difficulties increasing, peaking in about June, and then starting to decrease from there on. But of course, as I said, what these things hide is the huge variability that is going on for different children and young people. And that's really highlighted by these graphs, where we've tried to pull out particular trajectories of how symptoms have changed over time. And what we see is actually, you identify, when you look at emotional problems, 4 separate groups who have different trajectories. There's this group along the bottom who account for about 50% of the population, who had no difficulties at the beginning of lockdown and have continued to have no difficulties in terms of mental health. Then there's this group along the top is about 10% of the population. They have basically consistently had high levels of difficulties throughout. And then there were these groups in the middle, one group who started lower, but things got more difficult for them throughout the pandemic, and this group where things started quite high but have somewhat reduced over time. And similarly, when we look at restlessness and attention, we see similar things in that you have your stable low, your stable high groups, and then some for whom things have got worse and some for whom things have got better. And so who are these children who've experienced these different experiences? Well, again, there's lots of data that we need to look into for this, but just some hot off the press early findings is that we've seen a few patterns come out clearly already. So for example, when it comes to emotional symptoms, we've seen that females and people on low incomes are much more likely to be in these groups that started off high, and those who experience high levels of parent stress and high levels of family conflict are more likely to be in these groups that have ended up in the higher sections for emotional symptoms. And then when we look at restlessness and attention, again, those living in low incomes are at risk of continual high levels of difficulties. And then also those who end up high for hyperactivity and attention are more likely to be male, younger, but again, where there's high levels of parent stress at the beginning of lockdown, where children have special educational needs, where there's less immediate family support during lockdown, and where there was high family conflict. So this is just really a snapshot of some of the data that we've been looking at. And so if you're interested in learning more, we do put all of our reports straight up onto our CoSpace website. So there's now lots and lots, I don't even know how many reports on there, giving you various different outcomes and analyses. So please do have a look if that's of interest. And I just wanted to also say a bit about where we're going now with this data. So as I said, the CoSpace study is continuing. Who knows how things are going to change as we go on, and we're keen to really continue to capture people's experiences so that we can be feeding back these findings to influence policy and practice. And we're obviously really keen to delve deeper and try to understand the findings more. And so we're just starting now a series of qualitative interviews with parents, young people, and people that work with families to understand a bit more about what might explain the different patterns of people's experiences. And we're particularly targeting groups where either we've seen particular risks, for example, those in low income households, but also those who we haven't really captured the experience of that well in the survey. So for example, families who identify as being Black or from minority ethnic groups, as well as single parents. We're also working with colleagues around the globe who we early on in the study, we shared all of our materials so that people could use consistent measures. And so the co-space studies have been conducted all around the world. And so we're just starting a project to try to bring that data together and share our learning, which will be quite exciting. But we've also been trying to respond to the findings as we've gone along. So I lead a UKRI research network called Emerging Minds, and I think there's a lot of overlaps with the work that you're all doing. So please do have a look at our website and sign up if you haven't already, so we can keep you up to date with what we're doing. But in response to the pandemic, we launched a webinar series for parents where we brought in experts in different areas of mental health to provide accessible evidence-based mental health advice for families. And so that continues to be available. So please do have a look at that and the other resources that are there. We also are just starting now a study with colleagues at King's College London, which is a response to the sort of quite marked elevations in behavioural problems that we saw among primary school aged children. And clearly, you know, families have really told us what a struggle it was during lockdown, and actually for many families how that's continued. So this study is called Sparkle, Supporting Parents and Kids Through Lockdown Experiences. And essentially we're working with the team at King's to develop an app for parents that provides parenting support for everyday challenges in a range of different situations. And this is a really interesting study because basically it's going to be embedded within the co-space study. So participants in co-space will have the opportunity to be randomized to and to receive this app so that we can evaluate how it impacts children's behavioural difficulties going forwards. Also, in relation to the fact that we found elevations in emotional symptoms in primary school aged children, and also the fact that we were hearing from child and adolescent mental health services that they were really concerned about marked increases in referrals as restrictions started to ease, and also but the need to be able to continue to offer support remotely for families. So in response to this, we were funded by the NIHR, the National Institute of Health Research, to run a study called COCAT, which is about in which we're providing parents with an online intervention to help parents to help their children overcome anxiety problems with support from a CAMHS therapist who provides that support over the phone. And this is being compared to whatever CAMHS are otherwise doing in the COVID context. So it will also give us a great opportunity to learn a bit more about what is being delivered in clinical services at the moment. And you mentioned your school's mental health work earlier, and a lot of this is actually being delivered by the education mental health practitioners in school settings, which so it'd be really interesting to see how they get on with that. And just finally, I wanted to mention this CORE project, which is funded by the Medical Research Council. And this project is focused on adolescents, and it's much more, it's about basically working with adolescents to identify what they feel the needs are in terms of mental health support for adolescents. We're focusing on 11 to 16-year-olds as we move into the next phase of the pandemic and beyond, and then working with young people to create resources for them that they'll want to engage with. And so we're working with some great partners like Headliners UK and Fully Focused, both of whom train up young people to do journalism, make films and so on. And I've got a little picture of Northern Ireland in there just to highlight that we've been really keen to reach young people in Northern Ireland and get their involvement in this project. And we'll be really keen to work with partners, you know, across all parts of the UK to make sure that these resources are helpful, can be used and can be kind of distributed and got out to young people through the organisations that they currently access. So I just wanted to highlight that one there because we'd love it if people were interested in getting involved. So I'll stop there, and just to say thanks very much again for having me, and obviously huge thanks to our funders and our amazing teams across these different projects. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Kathy. That was fantastic. Really, really interesting. There's so many other projects and studies there that we would love to hear more about in due course too. So that's exciting, and we'll keep you on our list for future webinars and things. So thanks a million. Are you around for a little while if we have some questions? That's great. Thank you. I was going to just start by actually going back to John, Joe, if you're still there, and maybe if you could, you know, tell us a bit about what lockdown and what the pandemic has been like for the young people that that you're in contact with and what it's been? Because I'm conscious that your studies are sort of more general. So do you want to tell us about your reflections?
Lovely,
on the
thank you.
main issues?
Thanks.
Hi, John Joe, are you there?
All right, how are you?
Hi. So just to hear from a young person in Northern Ireland, what has it been like? What has it been like in your experience? What are the issues coming up for young people here?
I mean, it's a very big question.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of the uncertainty of it at the start. Obviously, I don't think any of us have ever faced anything like this before. Personally, for me, it particularly around exams was the big issue, because myself and a lot of others are the type of people who don't do well during the year and then sort of push everything the last minute and pull it out of the bag. So I know there was a lot of concern about exams, particularly coming up the when the actual results came out, and I think you all remember the impact that had on people. Like I had some friends who were predicted A's and were getting C's when that first thing. So the mental health impact on that was horrible. Although saying that, there was the lack of contact between people at the start. I know it got a lot of people down, and that was hard for a lot of people. But I think the more progressed through, and people started using the likes of Zoom and started using the likes of other things, and you were able to get in contact with people, that sort of relieved that a wee bit. And I know there was a lot of people run mental health campaigns by focusing around your physical health and trying to improve that. So I know a lot of people sort of turned to that. I know myself and many others were up and down Cave Hill 5 times a week just because there was nothing else to do. So it's sort of a mix. It affects people differently. Thankfully, my friends and stuff, everyone's been dead on, but it's an interesting one. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, you have. It's really good, because I would say similarly that there's different groups, there's different subgroups, and Kathy's presentation showed that as well. I love that sort of latent class analysis thing of the 4 different groups and the trajectories. We're big into those kind of statistical models. I think it's really helpful that we don't bring, bulk young people together or talk about them as one group. They are actually a load of different groups with different experiences and different issues affecting them. So you've got young people who are living in circumstances of deprivation and inequalities are hugely important there, and they're more affected than other young people. And certainly the studies I've looked at have also shown that disabled young people are having worse outcomes as well. I have a couple of questions for Kathy, just coming out of what you've said, John and Joe, and from my own interest as well. The first one is the thorny issue of exams. We're having a debate. Well, I mean, we've been told we can't cancel exams in Northern Ireland, that we need to do the continuous assessment and the exams for most of our pupils here. And then if pupils aren't able to attend the exams, the continuous assessment will be used. And our Children's Commissioner has spoken out, and she's consulted with young people as well. And we get the sense that young people would prefer the exams to be cancelled so that they could have some certainty. And John Joe, you mentioned the issue of certainty there too. So I would like to hear from Kathy about exams. What are your views there? Is this something you're grappling with in England? I know other regions have different approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it's something that unfortunately we're not able to look at in great detail in our data because of the way our study works. We don't have, people fill out the things on different days, and things have obviously been changing so rapidly. So we're limited in terms of what we can look at. What we have seen is that the older adolescents are concerned about the impact of the pandemic in the future in terms of employment and education and so on. And we also did put in some additional questions where we asked about people's concerns about schools. And we saw that, I think unsurprisingly, based on what John Joe said, is that, the secondary school age group particularly talked about feeling really worried that actually their final marks wouldn't represent their ability. And so that sense of lack of fairness. And so that's definitely come across in our findings. But I think, like you picked up on, I think John Joe's point about uncertainty, I think uncertainty has been the sort of hallmark of the whole pandemic experience. We know that uncertainty is a critical element of anxiety. So of course that's going to be anxiety provoking. So I think if we want to support young people, we do have to think about how we can give as much certainty about the things that it's possible to be certain about. Obviously there's lots of things we can't be certain about, but this is something that we could be clear about, I think. And I think the difficulty is, I mean, you know, we've obviously had a lot of chopping and changing, which makes it difficult for people that even if they're told there definitely will be exams, will they believe it? And will they have that sense of certainty? So I certainly think that I don't feel I'm the best person to qualified to talk about what's the best form of assessment, but I think certainly that what Wales have done has given their young people much more certainty, and I am sure that makes them feel in a much more confident position to be able to kind of move forward in a less stressful environment now.
Okay, thank you for that. That's really useful. And again, the importance of uncertainty and trust as well. Because this is the problem. Whenever there's a reversal and U-turns and all of these things, then young people don't trust their leaders and they don't believe what they're told, and that's what we're hearing. You know, that even if they were cancelled, they would be worried that they would be reinstated again, and that's so harmful for their mental health and for their stability. And this is something that, who was it brought it up? John McMullen raised as well, the importance of teacher-pupil relationships and those leaders in the classroom and leaders in the community and leaders in society generally. This is something I try and hammer home, the importance of leaders having a plan and communicating that and having that air of authority that gives everyone then the sense that things are going to be okay, or that someone's in control of this, in charge of this, even if it means the plan changes and shifts a bit. All of that just will calm everybody else down. That sort of calmness is contagious type idea as well. So that's important. So Northern Ireland Youth Forum are sending us some of their, 80% of young people don't have faith or confidence in government right now, and over 80% found their voice hasn't been heard throughout COVID-19. That statistic is horrendous, actually, 80%. I'm so hoping that all of these young people vote in future, because that's really how we change things. I'm always being asked, how do we make things different? And really it's about using your vote and making sure that political leaders, you know, when you become a voter, they hear your voice more. You would find there, and also giving young people a vote is something that the Royal College of Paediatric and Child Health have raised with me as well. Deirdre McMahon has a question for John. Joe, how did you feel about the government guidance? Did everyone feel particularly necessary, or due to age, more flexibility should be allowed? How did the guidance impact on young people? Were young people adhering to the guidance, John Joe? Have you any thoughts there?
I think, is this talking about through the lockdown or just in general?
Yeah, not meeting up with people, staying in, you know, all this stuff about the number of households that could meeting outdoors, or, you know, restricting the number of people that you could have in your own home, things like that. Was that
fair enough.
That they understand it, that they believe that it was, you know, useful and helpful?
Yeah, that on. I mean, I think on a sort of whole, I mean, people my age anyway, did stick to the guidelines and were good in doing so. But also, the amount of friends I have who for the last sort of months have been working in cleaning the NHS, and we're working in the shops, and we're on the front line. So I think it was a bit disappointing coming up to September time, where the media started targeting young people and talking about how the rise in cases and spike was down the young people. So I think young people as a whole did stick to the thing. Now we do have instances of the likes of Holy Ants and stuff, but on a whole, young people did stick to the thing, and the guidance and restrictions, and a lot were disheartened by the media reporting come September.
Yeah, because that was very stigmatizing. Young people were blamed for the spread. And we weren't, I think one of the issues was we weren't told how to socialize safely. Young people weren't really told what they could do. They were just told what they couldn't do. And it was just such a huge pressure for young people to maintain that, because, you know, you need your social connections. And Natalie's coming in from Northern Ireland Youth Forum as well, saying that the third top issue for young people in the survey was isolation and loneliness. And that's been mirrored in another study Rory O'Connor, my colleague, did, showing that, you know, looking at the different age groups, that those younger age groups, now that was the 18 to 35-year-old age group that study focused in on, or they used that age group, but that was the youngest age group, and they had higher levels of loneliness and isolation, and indeed higher and rising levels of suicidal thoughts than the other two age groups, than the older age groups. So this is an issue for young people more maybe than other age groups, or maybe other age groups weren't talking about it. So mental health and well-being, the top issues in Northern Ireland Youth Forum surveys, and isolation and loneliness. Will we talk for a minute about digital technology? I wanted to ask Maurice, if you're there, Maurice, about using digital technology in the pandemic. Did we see an increase in young people's use of technology? Technology for mental health, has that impacted, has the pandemic changed things there? Are we more likely to use technology now after this, as we emerge out the other end of this, because we've been through it?
You just caught me using some digital technology. I haven't seen any studies on young people's changing usage of smartphones. I think given the survey and the results of isolation and loneliness, and then that, I mean, we know anecdotally that a lot of the friendship bonds that, I don't know if John Joe would back me up on this, but a lot of people that are only now getting back into school in the last months or so, and they've spent the summer more or less on their own, maybe connecting with Xbox or whatever if they're boys, and maybe more sociable if they're women. And you know, I get a feeling that they're using digital devices more so to a degree, but maybe at the cost of the personal relationships that they would normally have with their peer groups and so on. So that's what I sense, you know, from anecdotally from talking to people, and I know that that's not very scientific. But I haven't really looked for an answer to your question, Siobhan. But I would think that people are, you know, using their devices a wee bit more, and if only to pass the time of day, and engaging with their peer groups. But I know that people get fed up with that after a while, and they do miss, even if they don't speak about it openly, they do miss the crack of the normal social engagements that they get as young people, either in the country or in town. So I'm not sure. I would like to have been better prepared to answer that, and I'm not sure about that as an answer. But I don't know. What do you think, John Joe? Okay, John Joe gives it a thumbs up.
Okay. So there's another question for you, Maurice, on the chat here, which I don't know what you'll think about this one, but I mean you've been working in this area of chatbots. How do you communicate non-verbally through chatbots? Well, can you communicate non-verbally? Is there much evidence about the emoticons and the smiley faces and all of that? How? Or does that get in the way? You know, what are the disadvantages of this sort of approach?
So the disadvantage is that it is a conversation, and you do just have words. So people want to be able to write words to converse. What a lot of these chatbots do is present buttons of words, you know, yes, no. We know all of this from messaging. So what we're finding is that most of the chatbots are copying the norm, the new norm in your most popular messaging, so that whenever you go to your your normal chat and you start typing, then in the other person to whom you're talking, you'll see a little ... ellipse to show that there's some sign of life there. So you get all of those kind of things happening that UX and user interface designers know are a good thing and keep people engaged. In terms of imagery and wee smiley things, David, yeah, they do emoticons and so on, and asking people, on a sad face to a smiley face is a fine way to ask a 5-point like heart question at how people feel about something. But it feels whenever you're trying to use a picture to convey something. And then of course it depends on, the cultural norms. So if you use visual metaphors in your imagery embedded in your conversations, people in Finland might not understand, what that is, what that image is if it's designed by somebody in Cork or whatever. So there are all kinds of issues, and don't even get me started on smart speakers, because a lot of you have smart speakers. Most of the young people I know don't seem to use their Siri or whatever the equivalent is in your smartphone. But a lot of people have them at home and do engage with them. Abandonment rates are high on those. So lots of Christmas presents that people get fed up using them, and the conversations in smart speakers aren't really conversations, they're more about commands. So I know a friend of mine was saying that she heard her teenage son giving orders to a young woman in his bedroom, and whenever she went to investigate, he was asking her for the football scores, asking Alexa for the football scores on their smart speaker. So you can ask, what did Liverpool win today? And the smart speaker will understand that. You can say, who scored, assuming the score was 1-0 or whatever, and it might be able to work out the answer to that question and present it to you. But then you could say, oh, when was the last time he scored? And the conversation would probably fail there. It wouldn't have a database. It wouldn't be intelligent enough to go back in time and work that out. So the conversations on smart speakers are shorter and more like commands and so on, and people abandon them. Young people, I think, don't use them. Some people do. I know that I spoke to some people from Action Mental Health in Fermanagh last year. So there was a young fellow with a speech impediment, and he loved using the smart speaker because he could just chat to it. Mm-hmm. It didn't, it was patient. It never got frustrated, and so on. So there are use cases of people that will use the voice-driven chat, but for text-driven chat, it's mostly character-driven, people typing in or using shortcuts of buttons with words written on them. And free text is a really difficult thing, where the chatbot says, how do you feel? And you can write anything in the world in any language you want, using whatever emojis you want. And the chatbot has to try and make sense of that. And if you type in, I'm feeling very lonely, I'm not thinking very highly about things, I just don't know what to do, I'm at my wit's end. What's the chatbot going to say to that? What should it say? So I alluded to that in my talk, and we're it's still a big problem. Wobot famously got it wrong whenever someone actually just said, I'm feeling suicidal to Wobot, and it said something like, oh, that's terrible to hear. How about we can make you feel better? And a human being would never say that. So a long answer, there's a lot out there, and lots of research to do as well.
Lots of research to do, and you raised an issue I was going to talk about there, which is the idea of if someone's suicidal, how can the chatbot address that or help them with that? And what I'm hearing there is it probably can't. It's not very good at that. Is that what you're saying? Basically, that there, that urgent support is not it's not something a chatbot can deliver.
So really, if you're thinking about a blended service, you could have a really dumb chatbot that gets the first bits of the conversation, just as when you go onto O2 or Argos or whatever, and you say, I'm interested in, or whatever, it's just a dumb chatbot that just tries to understand and route your query. And then it goes to a mental health chatbot that tries to, support you if you're feeling that your mental health and well-being isn't great. But then if you start using the kind of language of self-harm and suicidal behavior and ideation, then it really should root you immediately to a human being. And I think that that's the only way we're going to get these things to work. And of course, that means that the health services and the children mental health professionals need to work on blended services that allow the chatbots for onboarding with people with digital devices, that engages with people 24/7 anonymously and so on. But then if it crosses that Rubicon and there's danger, then a human being is immediately there, and it either routes to a service provider like Childline or whatever its equivalent. So that's quite hard to do. We've seen that the NICE has just produced new guidelines for digital interventions and so on, and it's a first step. And then we also see that ORCA is curating digital health apps and app interventions, including mental health apps. But what's needed is the sort of the intercalation of traditional and digital services, so that the current service providers who are brilliant at helping people, whether it's Samaritans, Lifeline NI, Childline, and so on, that they're part of the mix. But that people who don't feel they need to go that far can get the support from a WOBOT equivalent. So that will come. It has to come. But given that my first slide talked about the underinvestment in children and young people's mental health services, how's that going to happen? If we've got this continuing penny COVID austerity, there's no money on the hill. How are we going to actually fund properly mental health services? So we're trying to address that. We have a project called ChatPal, which is funded by Northern Periphery and has Action Mental Health as partners with ourselves and other partners around Northern Europe. And what we're trying to do there is to work towards a blended service, which is maybe presented by Action Mental Health and is digital and face-to-face. And we know that that's possible with AMH, and they've got the right attitude to do it. So there is some rays of light, but it's going to be a difficult thing to get funded and get priority. I think we need a mental health champion, to make it work.
There's a lot of work for mental health champions. A lot of work that needs to be done for sure, right? So Amy has pointed out a book by Jenny Kleeman on this issue, and I've seen The Social Dilemma as well, which is pretty scary. So those are relevant to this whole discussion. I'm wondering, would Kathy like to come in and talk to us about, are you doing things differently over there? I was really interested in the key variable that seemed to differentiate primary school from secondary school young people is their connections with their friends, and our primary school children not able to use those the technology, or what are the issues there? Is there any way we can help primary school children connect?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and certainly it was really striking how, not surprising, but really striking how few younger children were having regular contact with their friends, but not surprising, because when you see the different ways that the teenagers were connecting, a lot of those things are not going to be so appealing or available, or promote the sorts of ways of communicating that younger children will have with each other, which is less about sort of having a chat, and also probably less about playing games online with each other. And I think obviously parents in many cases are going to be a bit probably more limiting of time on screens and so on for younger children. So it does mean it was really, I think, a really limiting time for younger children. And so personally, I was delighted when the rules were changed to reflect the fact that younger children, one, are at lower risk, but also of the virus, but also that younger children, is much harder. It was harder for them, that in terms of homeschooling and for their families, and also for them to connect with peers. And so I really hope that if we're in the situation again, we'll be able to maintain that approach and think about those broader needs that young children have and how we facilitate those. But I mean, in terms of then going in and supporting families, yeah, you're right. That's right. That, you know, using the sorts of tools that many of the adolescents might be able to use are not going to be accessible for young children. And what we've heard from child and adolescent mental health teams, that increasingly throughout lockdown and beyond, they've been working more with parents and carers and less directly with younger children. And that actually fits very well with the approach that we've been taking for some time for children with anxiety problems, because we've always had a problem with access to services. And what we've found in a number of studies is that actually, if we support parents to support their children, it's actually really cost effective, because we can do that quite efficiently in many cases, and we've got good evidence we can get really good outcomes. So what I really hope we'll see is much more of that approach where families can benefit from it, but also we need a lot more research to understand where that's not going to work, who that's not going to work for, which parents are not going to be able to access that, so that we make sure that children who might need help are not missing out. So one of the approaches we're taking at the moment, we've got a really large study we're doing called ICATS, which is about improving identification and intervention for child anxiety through schools. And basically we screen children in primary schools, and then we offer parents the online intervention that I mentioned with therapist support. But we're also, as part of the kind of whole pathway from screening to intervention, making sure there are lots of routes to make sure that there are alternatives for children where parents don't choose to take part in intervention or are not able to for any reason. So we include whole class-based approaches, lots of psychoeducation for children and families, and lots of opportunities to flag up other ways to access different sorts of support, because obviously one size isn't going to fit all. So I hope what we can learn from this is that actually we can do a lot by empowering and supporting and skilling up parents. However, we also obviously need to keep in mind those that we're not going to reach those ways.
There, super, thanks. It's a really comprehensive answer. I'm wondering, there's a lot of comments coming in. Someone's raised there about safeguarding and digital technology for mental health and their mental health issues there. Let's get Dominic's question. And do you think the reduction in emotional difficulty seen for some in secondary school during school closure may reflect things like levels of bullying, social anxiety, so that going to school is actually problematic for some children and creates more stress, you know, when they're better at home with their parents, if that environment is good for them?
Yeah, I think it's a really important and interesting question. I mean, the tricky thing about our study is obviously we started in lockdown. So what we don't know is how people were doing just before lockdown. So although we saw things reduce, that might have been because they had particularly elevated right at the beginning of lockdown, and then we saw things reduce from there. However, what we have found is consistent with what's come out of some other studies now. So there was a study conducted in Bristol where they had previous data from year 9 students, and then they followed them up in lockdown and found that some improvements in mental health among that age group. And other studies, there's another study in Oxford that included called Oxwell, which involved a really large sample of children and young people, and they basically asked young people, how do you think the pandemic's affected you? And there was pretty even numbers saying badly and well, so highlighting what we said before about the real variability. But certainly across these studies we're seeing that there certainly are groups of young people for whom life was easier when they didn't have to go to school. And we actually saw particular improvements amongst those families where children had special educational needs and also pre-existing mental health problems. So, clearly, and from talking to families, clearly for some children, the pressures, the academic pressures, for those children and young people who feel a bit like a square peg in a round hole in school, being out of that, being able to learn in ways that suited them better, seemed to bring benefits. And also for those where there are social challenges, they obviously were removed from those. There were a lot of concerns about then what would happen when children and young people were required to go back to school. And I do know that the numbers of families that have deregistered their children has increased because of families finding that they felt their children were just much happier outside of the school context. So I think there is a lot to learn from that. I think the thing to emphasize is the vast majority of children and young people have settled back in fine. But there's obviously this subgroup that we do really need to pay attention to, where school really wasn't working for them, and lockdown provided an alternative, and we need to really learn from that experience to think about how we can do school differently in a way that is more, a more positive experience for more children, young people.
Can I just say, right, can I just, no, I work for Cause, charity supporting carers of people with severe mental illness. I had a terrible experience myself.
You're on mute, sorry.
And well, he's a young adult now, but he had to go into hospital, and it was really very stressful time. But the lady, the social worker, told me they were inundated with young people over lockdown coming into the mental health services over the first lockdown, and it was just a very, very difficult time, and that you couldn't visit, and it was an extremely difficult time. But also my younger son, I found with the school, trying to work from home, and your child doing school at home was very challenging. Trying to keep my son at his schoolwork, and all the the difference of trying to do it online, and I know all the schools were different, but it was a very challenging time, because it was more just sending work home instead of teaching.
Yeah, and I think that's really important also, isn't it, that the people's and that's the trouble with studies like ours, which kind of group everyone together, that people's experiences of school was so different during that time. There were some people who were getting 8 hours of amazing effectively face-to-face treatment, and then the rest of us, we had a similar experience to you, where it was much more a case of lots of online worksheets, and so yeah, and then it's quite hard to get them motivated to do that stuff, isn't it? Because it's all pretty boring, really. So I think definitely, when we look at the overall trends in our data, it definitely doesn't pick up the nuance of those very different experiences.
I think too, it was all, email and things like that. If the teachers had been maybe giving them wee phone call, and maybe, talking to them directly and encouraging them a wee bit, and that sort of thing, as well as just, the email and things like that. There was no speaking to them over the phone ring, which I think would have been good, but it was a terrible experience for us, as I believe was many others, when speaking to that social worker, as the fact, because obviously it's not normal for young people to be isolated.
No.
I think when we're older, we can cope with it better, but for young people, it's it just was a horrendous time now.
Thanks for that. That's really, it ties into a question then that I would have about screen time generally, because some of the studies I've looked at, maybe it's your study, this was a big concern of parents. It was kind of, after emotional wellbeing, was the amount of time they were spending on screens, not learning, not necessarily doing their online learning. And then the other one is the digital divide, which is actually a huge issue in Northern Ireland. A lot of our young people don't have access to good broadband. Even I don't have access to good broadband myself. Or devices, or so have you anything to say about that stuff, Kathy?
Yeah, I think right. In our sample, as I showed you, amongst the adolescents, actually they were really well connected, the people who were taking part in our study. Maybe that's not surprising, because it was an online survey, so it did rely on people having reasonable internet access, and it, given the pattern that we saw, it really looks like that was really useful, that they were so connected over that time. But we need to look into that more, and it's really highlighted to us the how reliant and many will have been on being able to connect with peers in that way, in the absence of any other ways of connecting with peers. And so absolutely reason to be very concerned for those who didn't have that, because essentially then there were no other ways of linking up with peers particularly. And and certainly they're so, young people are so creative obviously in the ways that they use screens. And my boys will often have, they'll be chatting to one group on the Xbox, and then there'll be 4 other people on WhatsApp over there having a chat, and it's quite, can have quite a vibrant social life. And so if you don't have access to that, and others who you would otherwise be socializing with it can be very easy to feel very isolated or be isolated. So I think in many ways the access that people had to screens during lockdown was probably a real plus. And I think of what it had been like for us in the 80s, and we wouldn't have had any of that stuff. And so I feel that they're kind of very lucky to have it. But at the same time, then parent obviously does raise concerns for parents about what content they might be accessing, and also what is an okay amount of screen time. And in our Emerging Minds webinar series that I mentioned earlier, we actually hosted one session specifically about screens called Screens, Teens and Quarantine, where we brought in some experts in screen time, and actually their general message was quite a relaxed message, which was actually don't be too rigid, try and be interested and curious in what your young people are doing on screens, rather than kind of laying down the law, and don't worry too much about absolute amounts of time. If it's getting in the way of them doing other healthy behaviors, if it's stopping people going outside at all, if it's stopping people to exercise, if it's stopping people from eating, if it's stopping people from communicating, then we need to address those things, but not to get too hung up on it. And they particularly emphasize actually the potential utility during lockdown. And then in terms of the sort of content, again, rather than trying to set very rigid rules, trying to be curious, having conversations to explore the sorts of content people might be looking at, and help people to kind of come to their own decisions about what healthy content looks like. I'd really recommend having a look at that session, that webinar. It's available through our website if people are interested, because it was a really interesting and well-informed session.
Muted again. I promoted that on social media at the time.
Thanks.
It's a question. Yeah, it's a question I get asked all the time. It's something I'm worried about myself, because I have a 3-year-old, and she's just, there's nothing she likes more than looking at my phone, and it is really quite scary. So it's reassuring to know that it's not really about evidence of harm. It's what it's replacing, kind of. It's what they're not doing when they're doing that we should be looking at. But yeah, at 3, it does make her angry and aggressive and stuff when she has to let it go, and that, that's,
and that's the other thing that we haven't really captured. But that inevitably there is a risk of increased conflict arising related to battles over screen time, and particularly when younger people have to turn it off, which can be, all of these things are set up to just pull them in and want them to carry on doing it forever. So it's really hard. And I think, again, the messages are very much about recognizing that, acknowledging that, setting reasonable expectations and plans kind of in advance, and trying to give young people as much control as possible. So letting them know in advance, right, you've got this much time, set your own alarm, turn it off yourself.
Yeah, from the Emerging Minds Network. Sorry,
I was trying to get your link there to put it on the chat before we go and started. It's because somebody asked for that. That's great. Sorry for interrupting you there. Okay, let's put it on there. John Joe, do you want to come in on any of these points about screen time and connecting digitally, just as the last word kind of on it, because we need to stop at 2. Have you anything that you want to tell us from your perspective?
I was just thinking about when you were talking about experience of school and all during the whole thing, and about the sort of learning. I mean, I was upper 6th last year, so I'm first year of uni. And I'm going to be brutally honest with you. After schools were closed, I think everyone in my year sort of treated it as a holiday. I mean, we ended up with a 6-month summer. And I got the point that, in fairness, the teachers, the war sent them through work, but no one seemed to be doing it. But in terms of, for me anyway, afterwards, like uni this year has been a weird experience. Because you're in tutorials and you're in lectures with hundreds of people you've never seen before. So no, just my thoughts on that there. And in terms of screen time, if during lockdown, of course, screen time has went up. You're in the house constantly, and for a lot of people, even your sleeping pattern was gone. I know there was times that I was going to sleep about 6 in the morning because you're completely off balance and waking up at 3 o'clock in the day. So yeah, that's sort of, I don't know where I'm going with this, but I hope that sort of helped.
It does. It's really helpful because university students, a whole other issue. This is, but you know, these are the 3 years of your life when you want a particular type of experience and you anticipate that and look forward to it, and it's been pulled away from you, you know, and there's so much uncertainty there too. So that's a big one. It also brings us nicely onto the topics that we're going to look at in our second webinar, where we've got the student wellbeing study. Elaine Murray is going to be talking about that, you know, the study that we're doing in Ulster with Letterkenny, where we're looking at mental health in the student population, and we may be able to have these conversations. So, you know, go into more detail about what it's like for students then too. So Rhonda, who are other speakers for that? Do you want to remind us? Are you still there? Nope.
Mute. Sorry,
Yeah.
wrong button I was pushing there. Hi. Yes, so we have Lisa Bunton from QUB is going to talk to us next week about their research. She's a social work lecturer and child welfare researcher at Queen's, and off the top of my head I can't remember what the name of the study was, but it's really interesting. Pure Mental NI are joining us as well, two young fellas from QUB who've set up their own network to lobby for changes in mental health in young people. Dr. Elaine Murray and Dr. Margaret McLafferty are joining us to talk about the SPIT project, student psychological. Do you remember the name of that? Exactly what it is?
Psychological wellbeing trial. We've a meeting.
Okay, that's right.
And Lisa Bunting was the prevalence, the adversities and mental illness prevalence.
That's it. And Helen Coburn from Youth Action NI is joining us to talk about life maps as well. So another interesting program.
Okay, sorry, we've gone 1 minute over, and that's not good. It's not good sharing on my part. Look, thanks a million. This was a bit experimental. I haven't shared this sort of thing before, so I hope it went all right. It was a good experience for you all. Thanks particularly to our speakers, and we'll send out the link to the next webinar on our mailing list now as well, and you can get a copy of this. Thanks a million. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye. Bye.